Hello to everyone joining. We'll just give folks a couple of minutes to make sure they are connected before we get started. All right. Thank you everyone who's joining us today, and welcome to the Wisconsin chapter of the Wildlife Society webinar series that we put on in collaboration with the Wisconsin Center for Wildlife. My name is Christine Anhalt Duffys. I am the current president of the Wisconsin chapter, and welcome to everyone here who's a member, and to our folks who aren't a member yet. A little bit about WCTWS, in case you're unfamiliar with us. The mission of our chapter is to inspire, empower, and enable the community of wildlife professionals, students, and retirees to sustain wildlife populations and habitats through science-based management and conservation in the state of Wisconsin. If you're interested in learning more about WCTWS and becoming a member, you can visit our website. That's at wildlife.org/Wisconsin. So thanks again to everyone joining us here today. This webinar features Dr. Bob Holsman. Bob is the past president of WCTWS and is a social science researcher within the Wisconsin DNR. And he's been in that role since 2013. Prior to that, Bob was on the wildlife faculty at UW-Stevens Point. He has a PhD from Michigan State University and has been doing survey research for 25 years. And today he's going to help us think critically about the use of surveys as a human dimension tool in wildlife management. Thank you, Bob, and take it away.
Thank you very much, Christine, and good afternoon, everybody. If my ugly face is a little bit too close to your computer monitor, I've got to lean into my computer so you can hear my mic. So avert your eyes, but hopefully you'll be able to hear me okay. So today's talk is you don't really want to do a survey, and we'll talk in a minute or so what's behind that title. But first, I want to acknowledge my co-author for today's presentation, Leslie Knope. And we might have a brief commercial interlude here, but I think her message will be well worth it.
The Bachelor is back.
Oh, it had to be The Bachelor.
On ABC.
Oh, man.
With YouTube TV.
Hello. Hi. My name is Leslie Knope, and I work for the Parks and Recreation Department. Can I ask you a few questions? Would you say that you are enjoying yourself and having fun, having a moderate amount of fun and somewhat enjoying yourself, or having no fun and no enjoyment? I'm going to put a lot of fun.
Miss Knope, there's a drunk stuck in the slide.
Sir, this is a children's slide. You're not allowed to sleep in here. You know, when I first tell people that I work in the government, they say, oh, the government stinks. The lines are too long at the DMV. But now things have changed. People need our help. And it feels good to be needed. Could you put your arms to your side? And that might help you slide down a little easier? Do you want to come this way? Okay, we're going to need you to get out. Get out of the slide. Okay? Here we go.
Okay, please go away.
Okay, wake up. Here we go, out of the slide. You know, government isn't just a boys' club anymore. Women are everywhere. It's a great time to be a woman in politics. Hillary Clinton, Sarah Palin, me, Nancy Pelosi. We did it. You know, I like to tell people, you know, get on board and buckle up.
All right. So I like to start with that when we're talking about surveys, because it illustrates a couple of points. One of which is it's always a joy to be in government, work with the public. So that, you know, let's get that out there right away. And then the second thing is, you notice the question she asked of the young lady in the sandbox. And question writing is a whole nother seminar. And maybe at some point, if I don't wear out my welcome, maybe I can offer part 2 of this and get into question design and writing, which is, you know, that could take us up the whole hour. But I find in my work in this area, most people want to jump right to that. They decide they want to do a survey, and then they want to start writing questions, and off they go. And really, the title here is you don't really want to do a survey, because I want to caution people about using this tool and making sure it's used appropriately. So, and it's kind of funny when you think about it, because I make my living doing surveys. Here's a list of a few of them I've done in the last few years in terms of the audience we sampled and what the topic was about. And as you can see in my work at DNR, I get to work on a variety of issues, not just wildlife, certainly fishing, park settings, other types of things. And so we do a lot of surveys at DNR for sure. But I also have to tell you that you'd think that a guy who, makes his living doing surveys would be trying to sell that idea all the time. Like the used car salesman, what's it going to take to get you into this today? How much do you have to spend? Let's get you to drive off the lot in this. When actuality, I spend a good part of my job, probably more of my job than not, talking people out of doing surveys. So I have a lot of people in our agency that come to me and say, hey, we want to do a survey. I say, oh, okay, let's talk about that. And usually, 2 out of 3 times, I've either talked them out of doing a survey, or I've talked them into something else, some other data collection tool that's more appropriate to what their particular information needs are. So for those of you that are going to be doing surveys, I know some of you do. Some of you are going to be on committees or in groups or programs that say, hey, we need a survey. After this talk today, I want you to be the one who puts the foot on the brake a little bit and ask the questions about whether it's really an appropriate use of resources, and it'll get you there. So to start off, words I think are often taken for granted, and sometimes semantics can get in the way. So I want to distinguish between 2 terms that are often used interchangeably, but really are not interchangeable. And that is survey and questionnaire. Okay. And so I want you to think about it in this way. All surveys use questionnaires, but not all questionnaires are surveys. Okay. So a survey is more about the process that you use, and the questionnaire is more about the instrument or the tool. And a survey, in a technical sense, describes some data collection on a subject of interest. Could be hunting, could be park visitation, could be chronic wasting disease, or anything else. And you're using some probability-based sampling scheme to target a particular audience. Or it could be a census. Censuses are quite rare. Of course, we have the United States Census that's conducted every 10 years, where every person is counted. If we've got a small population in natural resources, you might do a census. You might be up at UW-Stevens Point and you want to find out what the undergraduate wildlife majors think about something. There's in any given year, maybe 500-600 of those. You have all of their contact information. You could do a census. But for the most part, we're talking about sampling. And again, the questionnaires are about the tools that you use in concert with that survey. But questionnaires are used a lot of other places that aren't surveys. And we'll talk about that now. I mean, really, it gets to this difference between what is probability-based sampling and what is non-probability-based sampling. And in probability-based sampling, the key word is random. You have some random selection of a subsample of the folks that are part of that population, and you invite those to take your questionnaire. Okay, and so again, we'll talk about the different ways you can invite them and the different modes for doing that. But at the core of it, probability sampling is random. Now, simple random is everybody has the same chance, right? Stratified random is when you have some basis for which you want to ensure that some subcomponent of that population is represented enough in your data. I'm going to use a fish example. I apologize, but it's fresh on my mind because that's what I'm working on today. We're doing a statewide survey of anglers about walleye regulations. And because walleyes have a whole bunch of issues that are particular to the ceded territory, where we have co-management with the tribes. It was important for us to stratify to get enough representation from the north. Because if you look at where people live in Wisconsin, if you draw a line through the middle of the state, about 3/4 of the people live south of that line. So if you randomly sample, 3/4 of your resulting respondents are going to be from southern Wisconsin, and that might not leave you enough to talk about what the concerns or the opinions are of people in the north. And because it's so important where walleyes are concerned, we did a stratified sample and we oversampled the north. But having said that, those folks are still randomly selected within their strata. Non-probability sampling is anything that is left to chance, where people are self-selected. You use volunteers or other means to take a questionnaire. And the challenge with that, of course, is the data you collect. You know, if the objective is to infer representativeness of the population, you can't do that in non-probability sampling. Now, that isn't to say that that information doesn't have any value. It could serve some other purpose. But if you're trying to quantify how some group feels about some issue with precision and confidence, you need probability-based sampling. All right. So another one of the questions, you know, I get sometimes as well, you know, I'll use the phrase, is it a scientific survey? And then the question comes up, well, what makes something scientific? And a lot of times, again, people go to the mode, which I have at the bottom. There's a variety of ways you can distribute questionnaires. You can do it in person. You can do it by mail. You can do it sending people to a link to a web survey. And sometimes I think people think, well, it's an email or a web survey, so that's not scientific. Well, it has less to do with the mode than, again, what process did you go through in selecting your sampling frame and getting people there? You know, I think about some of the on-site in-person interviews we've done at boat landings and wildlife areas and state parks. Are those probabilistic samples? It kind of depends a little bit on the schedule you set for undertaking those questionnaires live and in person. You can do some things that make them more probabilistic, or you can do things that are more by chance. So it's not the mode you use, it's the sampling frame and design that determines whether or not you've got a scientific survey. And a scientific survey simply means that you can have confidence that the data you collect represent the population of interest on the subject that you're talking to them about. All right. Now, reasons to do a survey. And again, I'm playing tongue in cheek here a little bit with my title of you don't want to do one. You might want to do one, but just make sure you're clear that you're doing it for the right reasons. And then we'll get into some other sort of criteria for whether you should do a survey or not. But you know, these are some of the good reasons and not so good reasons I hear from people when they come to me and ask if they should do a survey or if they can do a survey. It's almost easier to start with the not so good column. I think, and I don't think a lot of people consciously think this, but it's sort of like you're doing a new master plan, or you're doing a species plan for black bears or rough grouse or whatever. And then it becomes a situation, well, we need public input. Well, public input is a fine idea, but there's a lot of ways to gather public input. And before you choose the tool, you need to, again, understand why you're collecting it, what are you going to do with it? And then, you know, sometimes you have to ask, what are you going to do if you hear things you don't like or that, you know, are not possible or impractical or what have you. So you need to weigh all of that. You know, sometimes, you know, frankly, I think government agencies, you know, myself included, do it just because they're compelled to by law or code, or they feel like if they don't, they'll get criticized. And so sometimes you're doing it just to check a box and say, we did it. I mean, and that's the truth of the matter. But those aren't the best uses of a scientific questionnaire. The left-hand column, you're getting more into the more appropriate uses, and that's if you want to quantify support or opposition to policy, if you want to quantify behaviors, if you want to quantify influence. Anybody seeing a theme here? Is there a word that's jumping out at you? Quantify. Okay, a scientific survey should be a tool used when you actually need percentages of X versus Y, or how many people who do this also do that, and you need to know that. That's where that tool comes into play. You can get into other things in terms of theory testing and predicting models of attitude and behavior and all of those things that frankly, typically you have more luxury doing that in university settings than you do in state agencies when, our purpose is driven more by meat and potatoes than it is highfalutin theory. But, again, I've done both kinds of work in my career. And again, it can be appropriate if you have specific models you're testing and trying to predict things. All right. The other thing I want you to think about in social science work that you do, or that, again, if you're involved in some team or committee or planning effort that is thinking about using it, is learn to recognize the difference between qualitative questions and tasks and quantitative. All right. Remember in the previous slide, I just said, if you need to quantify numbers, well, then that's pretty good clue that you need a survey. But there's a lot of times where information needs of some audience are much more exploratory. Okay, they are, you're looking for narratives, you're looking for themes, you're looking to uncover reasons people have for doing things that haven't been studied before, and for which it would be difficult to write a questionnaire anyway, because you don't know what the response options are. If your job fits any of those criteria, you might be better off doing a focus group. And that's what I'm depicted here in the picture, which is a facilitated group interview on some topic. And again, it doesn't give you percentages or means or standard deviations, but it gives you insights and a deeper, richer understanding of what people are thinking about some phenomena. If it's not focus groups, you can do interviews, okay, which is really the use of a questionnaire, right? One-on-one, but the nature of the questions, instead of being closed-ended, are open-ended questions where you're inviting people to share their stories or provide a longer response. A lot of times when people are starting to do a questionnaire that they think is going to be a survey, they'll come to me and say, read my questions, okay? And one of the first clues for me is if you have a bunch of open-ended questions, that's a qualitative exercise, okay? If you can't easily and meaningfully put response categories that people can check under the question, you're really talking about needing to do a different tool, okay? And so I think the thing about surveys I've noticed is that because they're so prolific and everybody uses them and everybody takes them, everybody starts to think that's the only option. And so I always tell people, when the only tool you know about is a hammer, every job looks like a nail. And not every job is a nail. Sometimes you need a saw or a wrench or what are those other things in the toolbox? I don't know. I don't build stuff, but you get my point. All right. Before I turn into some more, tips and tactics, let's talk about the future of surveys. And I have storm clouds on the horizon. It's been an interesting evolution in my career. I've been doing this for 25 years. And when I was doing this in graduate school, it was not uncommon to conduct a survey with some, on a hunting topic or a wildlife topic, where you could expect to get a 65 to 70% response rate if you did everything well and by the book. Those days are gone. Okay. Our agency, the DNR, is doing, for reasons I frankly can't explain, we're doing a lot better than most of our contemporaries in other state agencies, and even the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and other people that do surveys of their customers and stakeholders. We still, on a survey of our interested stakeholders can hope to hit 50% if everything goes right. Most of the time we're in the low to mid 40s, but increasingly, again, we're seeing them dip even lower. There's a whole bunch of reasons for that. One of which is what I would call survey fatigue. And it also gets back to my title. Don't do a survey just to do one. And don't do a survey if it doesn't fit your purpose, because the more people that are doing surveys and the more this is prolific and more it's out there, the more it's going to erode the public's willingness to take surveys when you really need to use them, right? So you're kind of undermining the best use of this tool by blasting these things out all the time. I think, we're also seeing, ever since, probably dating back to the mid 70s, and certainly, I think accelerating now, there's a lack of trust in government. So if it's Fish and Wildlife Service or NRCS or DNR or anybody else whose name is on the survey, I think people are less inclined to help and participate than they were a generation ago. There's also a decline in what I would call social cohesion, which is we are a very individualistic society. We approach things from a standpoint of what's in this for me. People are less likely to do something to help. And I think that's contributing to our challenges. Social mobility is a big thing, especially among younger adults, okay? Really hard to get adults 18 to say 35 to take surveys. And part of the reason is it's hard to find out where they are. They move a lot. Some of them are living in their parents' basement. Some of them don't have mailboxes and don't check the mail. And so, various ways that we typically reach people, if they're moving 2 or 3 times in 2 or 3 years, our population databases, it's hard to frankly catch up to them. And so that's a problem. And then the other part is declining self-efficacy. It's the notion that, why should I take my time to do this for somebody when nobody's going to listen to me anyway, or I'm one person? Why does my opinion matter? The DNR is going to do what they're going to do anyway, whether I participate or not. I don't have the potential to impact. That sort of cynicism that people have has some basis. Anytime an agency collects information and then doesn't do anything with it, or anytime you ask people for their opinion and then you ignore it, or you never acknowledge what you heard, it makes it harder the next time to go back and ask them for more help when they didn't see any benefit from the last time they did it. So those are all things that I think anybody doing surveys, before you decide to go down that path, you have to confront these challenges, and also how can you help improve that trust for people. All right, so like I said, the use of questionnaires has become prolific in our society. You can't stop at a Culver's or a Best Western without your cell phone popping up a customer service survey immediately. People are getting them in the mail. My congressman, Glenn Grothman, sends me surveys all the time. Do you think we should continue to protect our freedom and keep Mexican criminals out of the United States? Check yes here. They're not biased or leading, but the problem becomes is the more people are doing that, again, it floods that survey fatigue and makes it more difficult. So we are seeing response rates drop. The other thing, frankly, is it's become so easy to write and construct a survey because of the many electronic tools available, like SurveyMonkey, Qualtrics, Google Forms. Even with just a little bit of experience and training and background, just about anybody can design a questionnaire, and it becomes easy to throw out there to the world. And again, the more that people do that, the harder it's going to be for that tool to serve its purpose when it's really needed. I think I've beat that drum enough. All right, so let's talk about a couple things. First of which is the random cultural trivia question for today. And you can put your answers in the chat box and we'll circle back. If anybody can name the band that featured this photo on its album cover, kudos to you, and we need to talk afterwards. Things you'll need if you're going to actually do a survey. And the first thing I think I've made my point on is you need a clear purpose. You have to understand why you need the information, what information you need, and what you'll do with it if you can collect it. Adequate time. Again, developing a sampling scheme scientifically and writing questions and testing questions, administering it, collecting the data, analyzing it. That's not something you can do in a week. And a lot of people, I disappoint a lot of people in those conversations because they say, hey, we're going to do a survey. We were hoping to get this out next week. Nah, probably not. If you're going to do a survey, you need to be able to define the target population. Who is it? People will come to me and say, I want to do a general public survey. And then, I'll talk to them a little bit. It turns out it's really not the general public, which by the way, doesn't exist. It's some segment of the public. Okay. So be able to, be specific. Is it all people who bought a conservation patron license? Or is it all people who subscribe to your newsletter? Is it all undergraduates in your program? Whatever it is be able to draw a circle around it and define it. And then you have to ask yourself, all right, I know my population, but can I get to them? Is there some means on which I can sample? Is there a registry? Is there a license base? Is there a membership list? And sometimes you can define the population, but it's not as easy to figure out how you're going to get to them. And that's part of the challenge. You're going to need some technical expertise, perhaps helping work through that, but certainly, again, the question writing, the timing of, communication and all of that. And usually it's pretty easy to, find somebody that will help with that, or at least, bounce stuff off. Why did I just do that? Sorry about that. Okay. All right. So tips for getting people to respond to your questions, your questionnaire. Starts with probably the messaging. Okay. A lot of times if it's a mail survey or an email survey or something, it's accompanied by a letter or a message, right? And so you're going to want to tell people, what's the purpose of this? Well, why are you trying to collect this information? How are you going to use it? Related to that and getting to this idea of what's in it for me is you need to make the case of why their participation will result in benefits for them. That's easier to do with some audiences than others. Again, anytime we do hunting and angling surveys, it's a pretty easy sell because it's like, we're trying to make the rules and the opportunities we provide as attractive to you as possible and enjoyable. And your participation in responding to these questions about rules will help us do that. You're going to want to talk about how their identity is going to be protected if you can offer that. And again, if it's a university research, they have to go through an IRB process, the similar to animal use subjects process that folks who deal with critters have to go through. But regardless, you're going to want to, especially if it's a sensitive or controversial topic you're asking about, you're going to want to provide assurances of how people's names are not going to show up in a report. Repeated contacts. Probably the biggest mistakes that I see people make when they undertake a survey is they'll invite people once and then, call it good. The Dillman design method, which some of you may be familiar with, kind of pioneered how to get a good response rate. And at its core is the idea that you have to contact the non-respondents multiple times after the first contact. You can do that by mail. You can do that by phone. You can show up at the boat landing every Saturday in June until you get everybody that you need to get. But it's not, I can tell you right now, it's not going to happen on a single contact. And just think about your own, like, for instance, email use. How many times has a coworker, a colleague, or a student or somebody sent you an email that, you might have looked at it and okay, I got to respond to this, but you kind of put it aside and then, you get busy on something else and pretty soon, 30 other emails fill up that spot. It goes to the bottom. You completely forget about it. And then you catch yourself a while later and go, oh yeah, shoot, I should have done that. Well, if you're contacting people by email to take a survey, you can bet they're experiencing the same thing. If they don't see it and deal with it right away, it's going to go to the bottom of their queue. All right. And it isn't that they didn't want to help you, they just plumb forgot. So those repeated contacts are really important. Make your task as easy as possible. Give them an embedded link. Don't make them type in a URL. Send them a return envelope that already has a stamp on it. Take the extra measures that make their job as a respondent easy. Good questionnaire design, in terms of make it attractive, look professional, make the questions interesting and, not confusing or leading. And again, that's a whole subject in and of itself. And then if you have the opportunity, incentives. Research clearly shows that people respond to incentives. I don't know if any of you have gotten like a Nielsen's media use survey at home, where a lot of times they send you $2 or $5 ahead of time and say, we hope you'll take this survey when it arrives. And that works because again, it appeals to the what's in this for me. Now, obviously, most of us aren't going to be having a budget that we can give people $5 a pop, but you can look for other ways to give incentives, maybe donations or raffles or giveaways. All right, kind of locked up here. There we go. All right, now I'd like to talk real quickly about a couple of surveys that illustrate some of these points. One of which is we had a cool opportunity a couple of years ago to do a property visitation study at the Southern Kettle Moraine State Forest, where we did have a pretty good budget and some flexibility where we were given permission to go out and basically play and experiment with what kind of survey modes on site work better than others. And you can see here, one of the things we did was we had self-service kiosks out there where people could either swipe a QR code and go to an online version of the survey, or they could pick a flyer out of a mailbox and mail it back to us, or they could pick the flyer out of the mailbox and drop it in the box below it and take a survey. We also went out, myself and a number of my colleagues, and actually sat at trailheads and in parking lots and at campsites and asked people to take questionnaires on tablets. And so what I'm showing you here is basically the number of completed surveys we got versus the number we attempted, and then the response rates in the column. Okay, so it's no surprising that when you're doing surveys and interviews in person, most of the time you get a great response rate. Almost no one says no. This is why the census sends out people to doorsteps to conduct that, because it is a very efficient way to get completed surveys. It's also the most expensive one, which is why it's utilized so infrequently. So, I'm out there, at my salary in a parking lot getting, interviews. Yeah, I'm getting them, but it's costing my agency quite a bit of money, as opposed to having a kiosk out there that's not getting paid. But even that didn't do too bad. We also had people drop them on windshields in targeted parking lots, and that didn't do too bad either. QR codes, no matter how we tried to use them, they bombed. And I've been afraid of them ever since. I'm going to get back on the horse and try it on a project this summer. But anyway, so you can see that, various collection methods are going to yield different response rates, but obviously some of your decision is going to be based on, do you have the money to do the more expensive methods? Okay. Let's talk a little bit about SCORP. Some of you may be familiar with SCORP. SCORP stands for State Comprehensive Outdoor Recreation Plan. It's something Wisconsin and other states do about every 5 years to get federal funding under the Federal Land and Water Conservation Act. That's a really important and cool piece of legislation that has funded the purchase of all kinds of recreation properties, including, I know, a Schmeekley Reserve up at UWSP, but state wildlife properties as well, parks in urban areas. And so those dollars that get used to fund SCORP one of the sort of things that states have to do to pay back that, if you will, is they have to develop a plan every 5 years about how they're going to provide outdoor recreations. And as part of that, they do a survey. And I did the last one for the 2016 survey. And again, it's not just hunting and fishing, it's all kinds of recreations get tested. So we document those, we identify issues of concern, any opportunity needs that people have, and so forth. So survey methods for SCORP, I used 2 different modes, okay? One was a household mail survey, of which we mailed out 6,400. That's 800 apiece across 8 strata. The 8 strata on the map there are simply the regions that SCORP defines as having unique recreational and ecological characteristics. So we wanted to make sure we had enough representation for each of those. I also did something that I had not done up until that point, which was a panel survey of I think we requested 1,000. We wound up with a little bit more, which is we went to a third-party provider that has panelists or people that agree to take surveys for market research, and we gave them the same questionnaire. Okay. Ultimately, I pooled and weighted the results from both of these to reflect census demographics and come up with a complete picture. So we asked this question 66 times. How many days did you participate in blank in the last 12 months? And blank was 66 different recreations: softball, biking, fishing, hunting, all kinds of stuff. Okay, whoop, wrong way. And in case you're wondering, here were the top 10 most frequently selected recreations from that list, whereby people told us they had participated at least one day in the previous 12 months. Walking, running on sidewalks and roads is the most popular outdoor recreation in Wisconsin. Alrighty then. Picnicking, tailgating, cookout. Why does that not surprise me? We should have had brats and point beer in parentheses. What you also see in this top 10 list is you got to get down to number 9 before you see something wildlife related, and that's bird watching at home. Okay. Real quick, 11 through 21. You see fishing start to come into the mix. You also see bird watching away from home, nature photography. We don't yet see any of the hunting because, again, those are activities that are a much lower levels of participation. So anyway, that's that. But what I really want to tell you about is, again, kind of comparing the modes. And we want to look at how the mail survey did, or the postal survey, I should say, and that panel that I purchased. And what you see is essentially those 2 modes gave me, as a researcher, opposite problems. Mail surveys that we send out to your mailbox have been skewing older, rural, and male. Okay, part of that, it might be a natural resource interaction on the gender, but panels were just the opposite problem. They skewed younger, female, and urban when compared to census data. So essentially, by kind of comparing your respondents to what we know about the actual demographic characteristics of Wisconsin, we can weight and make adjustments in results. Okay, so we do that. And so we see the differences in age and gender there on those modes. And again, why that's so important is when you talk about something like big game hunting in Wisconsin, deer hunting, rural men are 7 times more likely to participate in big game hunting than are urban women. Okay. And then there are also differences across age groups. And again, so having a basis of understanding of what do your respondents look like and compared to the actual population can help you look at and evaluate your data and say, is this really hitting the mark or is it not? All right. So I want to compare that top 10 list I showed you earlier between our mail survey and our panel survey. Despite the demographic differences we found, the participation rates were pretty darn close. Essentially, we had one difference in each list of an activity that either entered or dropped out of the top 10, and then slight shifting around in terms of order. but both of those performed pretty well when compared to each other. Here are some activities that did not compare real well. All right. And again, it has to do with, I think, those demographic differences. Big game hunting. All right. In the postal survey, 35% of respondents told us they participated in big game hunting. Remember, we didn't survey hunters, we surveyed households. And there's no way that 35% of Wisconsinites participate in hunting. We know that from license data. So that's clearly biased high. Okay. In this case, the panel survey, despite its limitations, is probably much closer to the truth on that metric. We see, again, other big differences across the way, looking at, some probably hunting and fishing bias in that mail or postal survey. All right. Now, here's one thing that if you remember nothing else from today's talk, you need to remember this and take this with you wherever you go. Remember, I said online surveys can be scientific and they might not be. Where they tend not to be, or I won't even say tend to, where they're not, is what we call open access online surveys. This is where somebody puts out a Survey Monkey or something on Facebook and says, here's a link to a survey, go take it, Godspeed. We don't know who comes on and takes it. We don't even know what the population was to begin with. Who are these respondents? It becomes really difficult to take that data and make any meaningful sense from it. It is essentially the equivalent of an electronic town hall. If you've ever gone to a Conservation Congress hearing or a public hearing on any natural resource issue, and those of us who work in the field, you've done it many times, the people that show up in that room and scream at you are not representative of the population of interest, okay? They are the most motivated, most vocal, often most critical that show up there, or the ones on the other end that are most supportive and most ardent and so forth. Whoop! I got a little carried away there. Let me go back. Can I go back? I won't go back because this makes the point. All right, so when you compare, so during SCORP, we also put the SCORP questionnaire out for public consumption, okay? And it was a great opportunity to compare how does that results, compare back to a more scientific probabilistic sampling. Well, here's the difference between the open access and the panel version of that. The mean score represents the number of outdoor recreations they told us they participate in. The open access is statistically significantly higher than the panel, meaning you're seeing self-selection in the open access. People that came to a SCORP survey are most likely to be people who are outdoor people, that they wanted to give their input. And that makes sense, just like they're most likely to show up at the public hearing. All right, so right away, we know that open access is biased toward more avid, ardent people, okay? Let's compare some of the activities of the percentages, again, on that open access online survey, the OAO, to the postal responses. And these were the ones that had the biggest differences. All right. And again, people are more likely to say they do it across the board, again, because we were attracting a self-selected group. What's particularly interesting on this slide, and what I wanted to point out, was the biking on rail trails and the mountain biking, okay? I was tracking these percentages, okay, as respondents were coming in. And we caught wind of some biking organizations in Wisconsin that circulated the link to their members along with a message that said, make your voice heard. Let the DNR know how important these resources are to us. And I can time date stamp these percentages skyrocketing up after that message went out. So basically people organized and rallied their people to go to the polls, so to speak, and blew those responses much higher than we know them to exist in other modes, right? So again, this illustrates the danger of doing it. Now, why do people do it? They do it because it's cheap and it's easy. You got either you've done it or somebody down the hall has a Survey Monkey license. Somebody says, oh, we should do a survey. Hey, great idea. Let's write some questions. Let's throw it out. What do we get? Hey, sounds like fun. And then at the end of the day, you get those results, and like Uncle Alphonse always says, anything free is worth saving up for. All right. I made my point on that, so I'm gonna blow through this because I got one more thing that I want to do, and I don't want to take too much of your time. On SCORP, we repeated 2 questions that I had done the year previous on a statewide household survey we did about conservation funding. Okay, and here again we see that the postal mode and the panel mode tracked each other very well on the extent to which people agreed that all citizens benefit from state lands regardless of visitation. And interestingly, they tracked very, very closely with the results that we had done the year prior. So that replication gives us confidence that, think about it like if you've ever sighted in a rifle. If you've got 3 bullets on that target that are hitting in just about the same spot, that gives you confidence that the scope is on, right? Well, in this case, we got 3 bullets that are hitting really close. And so that gives us confidence in each of them independently. Let's now compare our mail and panel SCORP modes to that open access again. Now we get 1 bullet that's hitting way high on the target, okay, and that is the open access. We see an even higher percentage of folks telling us that they think that the public should pay almost entirely or mostly. That makes sense, right? We already determined this is a self-selected, motivated bunch. They like to be outside, and they think people should pay for that. All right. Now imagine if you're the policymakers at DNR or the state legislature that are going to propose some funding mechanism that requires people to pay a trail tax or some other means of paying. And you use the results of the open access to substantiate that look at the support that's out there. By God, it's over a majority of people. This should be a slam dunk. Well, you're going to be in trouble fast, because those results are not representing the public who's going to be asked to pay that bill. The mail and the panel thing, on the other hand, that's probably a lot closer to the truth, and that gives you a much fairer perspective. So this is my concluding thought here today. Again, if you're going to do a survey and you want to know what stakeholders feel about some policy, some regulation, some change, and you want to be able to quantify the extent to which there's support or opposition, for God's sakes, the worst thing you can do is a non-probabilistic exercise like an open access online survey, because the results that you get aren't worth the free money you spent on them. Okay. If it's really important and you really need to know, find the resources to do it right, do it probabilistically. All right. Summary, and then maybe if there's time for questions, we'll go there. But again, I'll take back my title now and tell you surveys are great tools for collecting quantitative data. Just make sure when you're going to do it that it's the best tool for the job, that it fits your purpose, allow the appropriate time and resources to do it well, and then have a plan for what you're going to do with the data, not just from an analysis standpoint, but how are you going to feed it into a master plan or a policy process or some decision making? And then non-probability questionnaires, they can serve a purpose too. I just spent a lot of time trashing them, but that's only because people are using them wrong. As a means of public input, for a quick sort of finger in the wind pulse check about things that are on people's minds, they can serve that purpose. Just don't pretend that the results were a survey. Don't walk around and say 48% said this and 64% this, because you don't really know who those people are anyway. Open access online web questionnaires are not representative. All right. I'm looking at the time here. I tried to go fast and leave some time for questions. And I'm happy to take some if you got them. I will admit I was not following the chat as we went. But I do see now Marty Moses, who I just ran into on one of our recreational properties hiking this weekend, correctly identified the Canadian power trio Rush, and that from their album Power Windows as today's culture trivia question. So Marty's the big winner. All right, do incentives skew the results and randomness? Good question. And it sort of depends on the audience that you're talking about and the nature of the incentive, right? So if the if the incentive is, like in the Scorp survey, if we'd have given an incentive was win one of these 5 rifles, and say we got Gander Mountain or Gander Mountain's out of business. Say we got Cabela's to donate this to us, so it didn't cost us anything, and we offered the 5 rifles to, we're going to draw from the respondents, right? Well, then the incentive would skew the results because it's going to make hunters more likely or shooters more likely to participate than somebody else. Similarly, if we'd offer binoculars, you might say, well, I mean, if I play softball in the summer and that's my recreation, what does that do for me? So the type of incentive can, the amount of incentive can. So yeah, you have to put some thought to it. But generally speaking, if the incentive is small enough, what you're really doing is kind of showing appreciation, and you're buying reciprocity, sort of like, I've given you something, now I'd like you to give me something back. And it's not at a scale that's going to bias it too much. The other thing you got to weigh into account is you have to balance the potential that incentive will bias your responses versus the potential that non-response is going to bias your sample, right? So I didn't talk about it explicitly, but what is the problem with low response rates? Who cares? Well, the larger the proportion of folks who don't take your survey becomes, the less likely or less confident we have that the proportion who do are representing the whole, right? So that's, in my mind, a more significant problem than what, a little bit of error may get introduced by way of an incentive. All right. Will Smith, I'm interested in writing a paper just for fun and because I'm super interested in the topic. Cool. Welcome, fellow nerd. I love, you're my people. Okay. Can I do a door-to-door in my neighborhood? But I'm wondering, what is the next best thing after that? Well, again, Will, it depends on, if you go door-to-door in your neighborhood, are the neighbors representative of the population? Are you, is it a community-based survey? Or are you, are you trying to extrapolate that beyond that? So that's, that's one of the questions I would ask. SurveyMonkey, again, it can be quick, easy, and cheap, save you some time. But again, how are you going to invite people to SurveyMonkey? Who are they? And do they reflect the population of interest that, is the issue that you've got? So as in all matters with this, the answer ultimately is it depends, but you got to think hard about who the population is and whether those 2 modes are the best way to get to them. How can we better acknowledge that we have used a survey questionnaire results? Just because we didn't use them doesn't mean that we didn't hear them. Right. Absolutely. So that's a great point from Dave. Again, in my job at DNR and my colleagues as well, we get brought into a lot of these conversations where people have a very sincere and earnest interest in getting public input, right? And so I will distinguish all the time for folks that there's a difference between public input and scientific collection of data. And again, sometimes there's a need for the scientific quantitative stuff. And, again, that conversation starts with, do we have the money and time and resources to do that? Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. But if your objective is not quantification and you just want to provide groups a way to feel like they're involved or to hear their ideas about something, super. And you can use a questionnaire to do that. But what you want to do, again, is avoid characterizing the results as quantification. or as representative. So we don't say things like, it's clear from, this public input process that, 78% of deer hunters in the state feel this way. No. What you can say is we did an input process where we invited a bunch of people to take a questionnaire. Those that self-identified as deer hunters, had the following concerns, and these two or three themes came out the most. Okay, so now you're kind of softening that. You're not characterizing this as something that's a precise measurement, and you're not characterizing your audience precisely either. It's people who took the survey or deer hunters who participated, and that's how I would handle that. All right, Shelley Dubé up at Stevens Point. How you doing, Shelley? Student Activities Committee for the Wildlife Disease Association. Students are interested in figuring out how well people, understand the One Health concept. Any advice on how to find the right population? And the goal is to publish the results. Cool. That's tough. Again, are you talking about a national audience? Are you talking about a state audience of people? Are you talking about, people who are more interested in wildlife topics or participate in wildlife? And I'm happy to talk with you offline too, and get your answers. But it's more or less, trying to define that population as best you can, and applying that to the resources that you have to get at them, and figuring out, is there a way? International group. Yeah, it'll be challenging, but I'm happy to try to think through what the options are that are available. Yeah. I think we're probably close to over time, but I'm going to allow my technical engineers and producers, Lacey Hill-Castern and Jennifer Summers and Christine to pull the plug on me, because those of you who know me know that I'll keep talking. Not a problem for this cat. So if you have additional questions, I'll take them. But again, I know people will be dropping off here because their lunch hours are done. I appreciate everybody showing up today and participating. And like I said, if I haven't bored you to tears, I'm happy to do another segment at some point down the road where we could get into the weeds on writing questions if you want, or some other aspect of this, or qualitative work. Focus groups are a load of fun as well. So anywho, thanks everybody for coming out today. But any other questions?
Thank you, Bob, for being a presenter.